too bad. There we go. What's up, guys? Hope everybody's doing well. Shout out to the homie Sticky C. Always keeping us in the dank. This shit is gas as fuck. I just swore like 6 times, so there's no way this video is not going to get flagged on YouTube, but oh well. So, thank you. I appreciate it, guys. I appreciate anybody that's watching any of this content that we produce, because I'm going to be honest, I throw most of this together pretty haphazardly, and it's really just for the cause. Like, a lot of it is just for fun, and you know, it's a good place to talk and just get shit off our chest and talk about the weed world. Thank you. Give me just a minute. We'll get Mac in here. Yeah, I'm glad to be here too, but the last couple of weeks have been kind of rough. I was sick as shit last week, and then I was sick as shit 2 weeks before that, and 2 weeks before that. I've essentially been sick every other week since August. That's the life of having a toddler. Is it really being difficult letting Mac in here again? This is ridiculous. Why do we have such a hard time? One sec, we'll get Mac in here and get this going. Yeah, the homie Sticky C murder. What? I will not let Mac join. This is such a headache. Sorry, Randy. I'm trying, I swear, bro. I've tried to add you manually. I just keep saying it won't let you join. Oh, finally. Why do we have such a hard time with this?
Yo, I don't know why it does that. It does that to me too when I be online, bro. But people will send the invite and it say it's accepted, but it don't never tap in. And then sometimes when it do tap in, the person's black and can't see. It's just wonky as hell. But what up, everybody, man? What's going on? What's going on?
What's up, dog? So I had something I had to tell you. I was gonna message you earlier, and I don't know. My day's been really crazy, so I forgot all about it. And then I was like, screw it, I'll just tell him when I see him in the podcast. So I was talking to somebody yesterday, trying to think of what the topic was. I think it was organics, something about cover crops. And he had he was asking me some questions about different types of organic growing. And he mentioned that he had learned about cover crops on your podcast.
Nice, man. That's dope as hell.
I thought that was awesome. And I was like, well, that's the whole point of doing these is like,
sure,
to be able to share information with people. And, not everybody has the same. I think the problem becomes that there's so much information out there that, like, especially for people that are kind of newer, it's almost easier to find somebody you trust,
for sure, and
then just kind of stick with what they say, or a couple people that you trust and kind of stick with what they say versus, man, I'm just going to try it all. You can't really do that.
No, for sure, bro. I had someone hit me in a DM yesterday about the exact same thing, and I wonder if it's the same person. But he was like, he's new to growing, and he's on forums, and first of all, forums is old school. I still go to them every now and then myself, but everybody got an opinion on the forum. You ask one question and literally get 50 different answers, and you're totally right, bro. At the end of the day, you find someone that you trust and that you see is doing well, and you try to mimic them until you can turn it into your own. That's what I did.
Yeah. And there's, like I said, like, so it was almost the opposite when I started growing weed, because all there kind of
Was form.
was like janky kind of forums that weren't really all that great. You know, the first couple forums disappeared. So like we all moved to Overgrow, and then Overgrow disappeared. Before Overgrow, there was like Usenet and different message boards and kind of things like that, you know, and then it got to a point where like there really wasn't a ton of information, because there was only a handful of people that had grown weed, or at least would admit to it, you know. And so there were a couple books. There were, you know, I got the Grow Bible, and you know, kind of I always joked that like when new people ask me where do I start, I almost always tell them get the Grow Bible, take it and put it next to the toilet. Every time you're in the toilet, just open it up to a page and just read.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter what you're reading, just read. Before you know it, you're going to be sitting in your grow and you're going to see a problem, and you're going to be able to diagnose it because you've just looked at that problem 100 times while you were in the toilet, and you didn't think about it. And that's exactly how I learned how to like diagnose nutrient issues initially, before I kind of realized it's a little tougher than just like look at a leaf and just tell me what's wrong with it. And it took me a little while to get to that. But like, you know, the easy ones, phosphorus problem, nitrogen problem, you know, after you've seen that so many times, especially subconsciously, when you're just taking a crap and you're not thinking about it, you know, you just kind of flip through a few pages. You might read about transplanting one week, and you might read about something else one, you know. But before you know it, you've gone through that book 100 times. And now you've got a good place to start, you know?
For sure. I'm the same way, man. Someone hits me up, the first thing I do is tell them, get your knowledge up, man. The knowledge will go a long way. But the second thing I'm going to tell them is you'll learn when you first mess up. You learn from your mistakes. You know, I'm pretty sure you've killed a couple plants in your day. You know, the first thing is put the fucking seed in the soil. You know, the third thing I would tell them is really kind of like, the plant knows. The plant's going to tell you what it needs, what's wrong with it. You know, learn how to be proactive and learn how to read your plants. You know, there's little telltale signs, for instance, like overwatering, underwatering. You know, if your plants are drooping, then it might need some water.
That's
You know?
biggest problem. That's probably the biggest problem, that even when people show me what's wrong with my leaf, the number one problem when I start asking the questions that I need to diagnose, it's almost always overwatering.
No,
and people don't even understand what that means, because just saying overwatering, people think, well, when I water, maybe I shouldn't give it so much. No. Overwatering means you're not giving it enough time between waterings.
Yeah.
So you're watering and then you're not letting it dry out completely. When you water, you want water to come out of the bottom of the pot. So you almost can't overwater. You can, but like it's tough to really overwater in one watering. But then you need to let it dry out to the point where no matter what your medium, unless you're in like
trying to drown the plant if you're going to do it in one water.
Right, you don't really have to. But you generally, even if you're in organics, no matter what your medium is, you want runoff to some degree. And you want that runoff to go away from your plants. So you don't want the pot to just sit in the mess. You don't want it, you know, you either want some sort of drain or trays or drips or something where that water goes away. But it doesn't really matter your medium. When you water, you want runoff, but then you don't want to water again until that pot is dry. And that means picking your pot up every day and feeling how much dry it is. When you water it, pick it up. Now you know how heavy it is. The next day, pick it up.
Yep.
One of those days you're going to go in there and it's going to be so light, you're going to say, it's time to water today, you know?
The first time I learned about drybacks was with Athena and running I forgot the guy that put together the program, but that's when I first started learning about drybacks and you actually using drybacks, because, you know, in my infancy stage of growing or thinking that I knew it all, you know, I wasn't giving my plants a good dryback time. And now that I'm in cocoa, I get to see even more pronounced, you know, the dryback stages, especially with the the high fertigation feedings that I do. You know, I can tell if my plants are eating or if they're. Are you back? You know, I can tell if my plants are eating by the drawbacks, and that's a good indication that people don't really realize too. Is you can tell how much your plants are actually feeding by the drawbacks and stuff
Now,
like that.
see, here's the difference, right? If you're in soil or if you're in a peat-based medium, so pro mix, a hand mixed soil, something in soil, and your plants droop, that's a pretty bad thing. You waited
Right,
too long.
right.
But when you're in cocoa and that happens, it's not the end of the world. Once you give them water, they're going to stand right back up. Everything's going to be fine. And that's the balance, is finding that point where that pot is empty, right? And you're dry, but that you're not kind of stressing the plant because it's dry. So it's really hitting a point where you know, okay, I've hit that point where it's dry enough, but now it's not going to kind of die on me because it went a whole day longer than when it needed water.
So, Jer Bear, to answer your question, so yes, if you let cocoa completely dry out, then yes, you
No,
do
no, 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 no,
have.
no, 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 no. We have to address the problem because that's not entirely true. So in cocoa, you want there to be dry. The buildup comes from not having enough runoff. So the problem is, yes,
Right.
if
I,
you don't do enough runoff in each one of your waterings, about 4.5 weeks into veg, you're going to lock the fuck up because you're going to go dry, and now everything's going to lock up. Everything's going to be a problem. But you can avoid that by having at least 10 to 15% runoff every watering and making sure that you don't lock up. You don't have too much salt buildup in the bottom of your pot. And then once you go dry, yeah, you've got a problem at that point.
yeah, yeah. So, like I was saying, to answer your question, so within my system, right, you don't let it dry all the way out, and that's why I mentioned about the frequent fertigation because it's kind of like what Turt was saying. Once I let it dry a little bit, and then I'm hitting it like depending on what stage it's in, I'm constantly adding new ppm, EC to the soil, but I'm keeping it at the same consistent level that I'm adding it into. So it's not fluctuating too much because I'm constantly adding new nutrients in it that's flushing the system out. You have to keep the system flushed.
The other
You have
thing,
to keep
if
that
you're running
consistent
salt,
EC.
anything, if you're running cocoa and salt, you need to be measuring the ppms of what you're feeding and what your runoff is every day. If those two get out of whack, you've got a problem. And that's where you're going to have that a dry cycle where everything's going to go to shit. Like if you have too much salt buildup, as soon as those roots get dry, they contract and they just grab whatever's there. And if it's the wrong stuff, now you've got a lockout and you don't really know what you've locked out because you don't really know what's in your soil or in your medium.
And Junior, to your question, when you speak of growing in hydro, DWC, recirculating and stuff like that, it's drawbacks is not a problem for you. You got way other problems to worry about, like spiking
Temperatures,
EC, temperature of the
temperatures,
water,
temperatures.
all type of stuff you worry about in hydro. So hydro, of course, your roots are actually sitting in the solution or the feeding, right? So you don't really get a drawback. There's no way to get a dry. If you get a drawback in a hydro system, you're in
You're
trouble.
dead. Yeah, you're dead.
You're
You
in
just
trouble.
lost your money.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. When you grow in water like that, if you're talking about DWC like water hydro, it's essentially the feed system is relatively similar. You're going to get much more explosive growth, but you're not going to have as much oil production, generally speaking. I've seen some really nice kind of newer as nutrients and stuff have changed and things like that. Some of those current, what is it, something current systems, hydro systems that I've seen some really nice growth in the last couple of years. But to be honest, once you go, like you said, in hydro, it's a different beast. PPMs and all of that's pretty much the exact same. EC, pH, all of that super anal numbers. But if you have dry anything, you're dead. If you have warm anything, you're dead. It's permadeath. It's permadeath weed growing. You don't get any mistakes. You don't get any there's no buffer, there's no nothing. Like you're done. The game's over. You come in, your plants are down, done. Game's over.
Yeah, same thing. Same. Chris, a lot of my za came from this motherfucker at the top. But anyway, I hate the word fucking za though. Shut up. All right. And he say, what if you're growing on rocks and in
Rockwell, I
water?
mean, those
The
are gonna
same shit.
eventually gonna go dry, but okay, so here's the thing. In each one of these different scenarios that we're talking about, the roots develop differently. So if you're growing in water, your roots are gonna be different than if you're growing in a cube, even.
Mm-hmm.
Those roots are gonna be different than if you're growing in cocoa, which are gonna be completely different than if you're growing in soil. So it's like it all comes down to the process of getting them to being a full, healthy plant. Um, I usually suggest if you don't know how to grow in something in a pot, I might avoid water for my first go.
Yeah,
And that's just me.
it's a lot
You
of.
do you. I've seen people jump into hydro, and they're just the sort of people that
Oh,
love numbers and love the over the top nature of it, and it's their thing. But it's tough, and it's all stats, and it's all numbers, and it's
so my first grow was actually hydroponics ever.
I did too.
Now,
I
now
did too.
did I grow pressure? No. Did the plant not die? It didn't die, but
Yeah, wasn't great.
it takes some skill, man, to grow hydroponically, man. You have to have that dialed in my opinion, because it's all the environment, the median is already so fragile. You know what I mean? And anything can yeah. I wouldn't recommend it. I would recommend
Current culture, that's what it is. The current culture. Those are those like super top of the line, like all in one systems where it's like plug and play, and you just pick how many sites you want, and it's all
bro.
built, and
I
it's all
seen the homie. Well, I wouldn't even call him a homie. I seen a motherfucker that spent 10 G's on a setup, current culture, built out a house in his backyard, and grew a big bundle of booth.
now.
First
To
of all,
be
because
fair,
motherfuckers don't listen. First of all, because
listen. The
motherfuckers
other
don't
side of
listen.
that is, I used to know a cat that used to run those systems in Denver. And I'm not saying, I haven't seen this cat in a long time, but I used to process their hash. And it was one of those people that they had so much material, a lot of people were processing hash for them. Um, and they did numbers. And when I say they did numbers, like you want to talk about big boy growing weed, like they were pulling 3+ a light, like they were pulling weed that yielded in the hash, in whatever form of hash they were running. Like they did work, but it was a 24/7 job. It's not at that point, that shit grows so fast that if you're not on top of it
It
24 hours
does.
a day,
It
7 days a
flows.
week, you will flush that
Man,
investment in an afternoon.
you know what though, man? Another essentially growing in cocoa is hydroponics. Let's be honest, because
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
definition
It's a
of
soilless mix.
right. But my homie supply chain, bro. I seen this motherfucker 2 weeks ago put some clones in his medium, bro, and of course his fucking room temperature, everything, his environment's dialed in, immaculate, right? But I just seen how much of explosion that hydroponics versus soil do. So guys, if you are looking for fast growth and you can handle that, hydroponics is the way to go. I would lean
It's fun.
towards cocoa for your first hydroponic grow before you start spending money on current cultures and DWCs and stuff
Don't
like
spend that
that.
money.
But yeah,
Don't
man.
spend that money until you're ready.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big investment, man. And here's the thing. Let me tell you a little story, man. This is a funny one, and I'll be super polite because now I have nothing but love for this kid. But I met this kid once, and it was a friend of a friend put me onto this, and he said, "Look, these kids have a pretty good setup, but they don't know what they're doing. They have no clue which way's up, which way's down. Okay." So I go and I consult on this grow, and at first I'm just kind of like, thinking I'm just going to be a console. Like, this is just going to be, I'm going to help these kids get up off the ground, and then that's it. I get there, these kids are essentially, it's a glorified growth trap in Denver. These aren't super uncommon if you know somebody and you know somebody. It's essentially a house where I think the rent was like 35 or $4,000 a month, and there was a huge deposit, but we could knock walls down. We had
Damn.
upgraded the power to where it was pretty much, we were running every room of the house had plants, the basement, the whole, there was a small living space in the kitchen, and the rest was a trap grow.
And that was their first grow?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
they got it.
So here was the problem. They had gotten a couple cuts. They had maybe flowered a couple plants, but they could not figure out how to fill 5 rooms off of what they were looking at, you know? So I kind of level with them, and I'm like, listen, this is how this goes. Like, this isn't a hobby. Like, this is if you want it to be full and you want this to be profitable, we'll talk about a split and whatever that comes down, and we'll figure this all out, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So long story short, all this kid knew was he wanted to grow as many plants as he could. He was ready to start a farm, an outdoor farm, and he was ready to blow it out. And his ambitions were significantly above where his talent was for the time. And I will tell you, when he left me, the kid could at least grow weed on his own and do so somewhat efficiently. So I like to think that even though the middle and end bits were a little weird and messy, and it didn't always, you know, those sort of weird, really gray scenarios are kind of weird and don't ever end well, and you know, nobody's ever happy, and it's just a weird thing. But we grew a decent amount of really good weed. And that's, to be honest, where some of the earliest strains that I started working with when I started doing breeding full time were kind of the tail end of stuff that we had started to put together and like pop and like, you know. And at that point we were running like the legendary Lemon G. We had a super lemon haze cut, the original Big Dirty, which then became the Nag Champa. I did a bunch of early deep chunk, some of the first early deep chunk projects I did there. I'm trying to think. I had some weird Colombian stuff we were running at one point, like this real peppery old school shit. Some sour stuff. I don't remember. There was something super sour. But it was fun, and for me it was one of those where like it took up a lot more of my time than I anticipated. And once it was up and running and everything was great, you know, I could have walked away and just been like, look, man, this thing's 100%, just run it, you know.
Hey, Sky Coop, I got some deep chunk, was it F14 that Turk sent me. I've been sitting on, and I apologize for sitting on. I know seeds belong in dirt, but it's crazy, bro, because sometimes when you get some seeds, bro, and you appreciate them probably more than you should, you can't, it's like you never had a right time to pop them because you want to make sure that, okay, everything goes right with this one because I know it's going to be fire. Oh, what happens if I find a pheno that I like? Do I have space to keep it? You know, so, but I definitely want to run the deep chunk. Like, is the deep chunk gassy? Is it funky? Is it lemony?
Kush.
It's Kush.
Chocolate Kush.
Whoa, you said, whoa, chocolate.
Chocolate, coffee. There's some gas, some pine.
Whoa,
but like it's a very typical. We've never had like Master Kush.
No.
The profiles aren't super unusually different. Heavy myrcene, but like lots of kind of punch you in your face. Really heavy indica.
Yeah, man. That's one thing I really like about terp shit too is it's gonna be cushy, man. You gonna get that Cali motherfucking reminiscence kush, you know. So I ran across
it just comes down to, man, there's not enough of it, and it's one of those things that like I really wish there was more people that cared about kush. You're starting to see more and more of it, and like you know, but like I'm talking about landrace Kush, old school Kush, new school Kush. If it's got pine, if it's got gas, coffee, chocolate,
No
yeah,
doubt.
we're talking about dank.
Nah, no doubt, no doubt. So cool. That's exactly the. Damn, I'm popular today. My phone won't stop ringing.
Everybody,
Yeah.
bro.
Yeah, no doubt, man. That old school Kush, man. I know exactly what you're talking about, bro. I might look young, man, but I'll be 40 in a few years. You know what I mean? I remember. You know what I mean? I remember that Kush that you can't put a name on. Like at least I couldn't, because when it got to Houston, it's lost its name by the long time ago. Probably we just know it's Kush. We smoking some Kush, you know. So yeah, man. And if you talking, I'm talking between 2005 to 2009 era. That's what I'm talking about. You know, anything before that, then I don't know. But around that era of when they say we had Kush, that's what I remember.
I'm thinking about going back, and I think I still have some like of the older generation deep chunk stuff. Maybe going back to some of the original stuff and doing an open pollination instead of an inbred line.
Champanelli. What you dabbing or what you smoking?
The homie Sticky C Murder.
Ooh, homie Stinky C Murder. That's what it's called.
No, Sticky C Murder is the dude that made it.
Oh,
I
I was
don't.
like,
Honest to God, I have to ask him again what strain it is. It's just straight gas. Like the profile is just pine gas funk. Like it's that OG Kush gas funk. Yeah, I got to be honest, man. I got good friends.
um, Ace, who's the what are you talking about? Ball Family Farm. Who's that, bro? I never heard of them. I don't know if they're in the chat. You talking to them or what?
Me?
No, my brother's saying something about Ball Family Farm. I never heard of them. I don't know if you see them in the chat or what.
So yeah. So what I talked about doing with the deep chunk, I've kind of gotten to this point with a couple of my lines. This is, I guess, the difference between just the way that I look at breeding and the way that I see other people look at breeding is that I start hitting like a F4, F5 generation, and I just start thinking to myself of all the phenos that I'm just cutting out. How many different profiles, how many different flavors, how many different things are we now reducing this the more times we inbreed it?
Mm-hmm.
And it just like I hit a point where a couple of my lines I've hit like F4 and F5, and I just don't want to keep the
Go
passion
that
to keep
direction.
working it and
Yeah,
forcing it down a line is not what I want to do. So like
yeah.
I've thought about going back to some of the original F1s or like with the deep chunk where I
Mm-hmm.
started, and instead of doing brother sister pairs over and over and over, what I would do is take as many males and as many females as I can get of different kinds
Mm-hmm.
and bang them together, and then we start doing the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, either that or you just keep doing the same process over and over, just more males, more females, and that's going to make considerably more variations, right? So there's more permutations. So the joke that I made at some point in the last couple of weeks was that if we had a big enough pool of genetics, right? So if we made a strain and there's enough seeds, we have enough to run as many as we want, right? We could run a million of them if we wanted to. Every variation of that cross is there. Every combination of flavors that you can think of, every different way that you can combine those genetics exists there somewhere. So the notion is if we had a large enough pool, we'd be able to swim and see everything that this strain or this cross had to offer,
Right.
right? But as we start to pick, we want this male and this female, we cross them. Now we want this brother and this sister, we cross them. When we do that enough, we're kicking all of that variation out,
Mm-hmm.
and you're making poodles. The only thing that matters with a poodle is that it has curly, fluffy hair and a little ball in its tail, and it looks a certain way. That's what inbreeding is great for.
Right.
That's what deep line inbreeding is great for, to make them all look the same and make them all breed the same.
It's
But
not
if you're
done.
into variety and variation, that's not for you.
Right. And that's the beauty of this plant, bro. Like, you could take it one direction and then you could take it all the way back to the left. It's, it's whatever you feeling at the time, bro. Like, that's how, when I breed, that's what I go for. You know what I'm saying? I see a vision. Okay, I like this one. I like this one. Hopefully I can find something in between, right? And then I find that and I work it. Okay, well, now that this is done and I like this, I want to try it with something else. And that,
Right.
man, that's the beauty of it, man. It don't stop, man. There's so many different combinations that you can do with breeding, bro.
There's
How could you
also
get
this,
bored? How could you get bored?
there's also kind of this notion that, like, let's say I made a strain. Okay, we're just hypothetical here, right? We're not talking about any strain. I just made a strain. I'm just a new closet grower, just made my first strain. Okay? 20% of those seeds herm. Right? 20%. That seems like a lot. That's about twice of what most breeders kind of consider. A lot of them are herming.
Okay.
So somebody would tell you that if you just bred that more, if you just inbred that more, if you just did more breeding work, that wouldn't happen. It's the greatest myth in cannabis right now. You're not going to breed that out to the point where it doesn't happen from a 20% ratio. That's just not what inbreeding is for. You could do that for 20 generations,
Well,
and I bet you still have numbers of plants that are herming no matter what.
well, think about
because you
it.
started with a plant that was
Right.
so susceptible. And it all starts with what you start with. If you start with seeds or genetics in the beginning of your crosses when you're starting out as a breeder, the stuff you start with is problematic genetically. If it has herm problems, if it's made from a female seed that was originally in a bag seed or something like that, if that's your starting material, you will forever have problems. Now, if you start with strains that generally don't really have problems with herms, A, you don't need to do a ton of inbreeding unless that's just really what you're looking to do. And B, you're probably not going to have a ton of problems down the road with herms and things like that because you didn't start with strains that are just viciously unstable.
Right.
And that's the problem that so many breeders don't realize. They started with garbage. And so many of your most popular strains, everybody looks at cookies, but cookies is the least of the problem. It's really not that common. The thing about cookies is that cookies has been marketed to death. So the reason you think that everything out there is crossed with cookies is because that's the people that pay for marketing. That's the people that can afford to put their brand in front of you. But the reality is cookies isn't in that many modern strains. It's just not. Like, it's not the most common. And so many of we go back and we talk about chems and we talk about OG, we talk about Gorilla Glue. These were all strains that started with bag seed, with seeds that were not a male and a female. It was a hermaphrodite seed of some sort that started their genetics. So it's like breeders that base their entire seed catalog on chem or OG or, a lot of these hype strains, the reason that they're proliferating the problem so much is because they started with garbage,
I said I was going to do a podcast about that exact thing, and I want to see how many strands have come off of cookies or come off of runts and have actually sustained the test of
See, that's we
time.
gotta back up. See, once again, we're using vague terms. When you say cookies, what do you mean? Do you mean the forum cut of Girl Scout cookies? Or do you mean strains that are sold under the Blue
No,
Cookies brand?
cookies. No, I mean form cut cookies.
That is not as common as everybody thinks it is. Because that cut was not as common as everybody thinks it is. Not to say it didn't get around, but to be the backbone of so much of our strains that people claim it is, because I hear this all the time. Everything's crossed with cookies. Everything's just watered down cookies crosses.
Yeah,
They're not
yeah,
that common. I mean, you can name the couple of big ones that, Runts and Sherbet. I don't think Sunset Sherbet's actually a Girl Scout cookies cross, but most people throw that in with like cookies. The other one that I hear all the time is gelato. The only reason that gelato is popular is because the West Coast flooded the market with gelato at some point. But it's also marketable. So Wish.com, I guarantee you, their top 3 selling Mylars, pre-printed Mylars,
yeah.
are Sunset Sherbet, Runts, and Peyton, Gary Payton, or whatever it is. It's like those aren't really what's going in those envelopes. Last year's outdoor booth is going in those envelopes. You can buy those envelopes for about a nickel a piece if you
Yeah,
buy enough of them.
yeah. Look, I'll tell you how I feel about that. I don't think the plants. I think all of those plants that we're talking about are great plants for what they are, right? But I don't think we can blame those companies or those plants because people replicated their brand and started putting booth in the bags. I don't
Yeah,
think
that's
that should
not
diminish.
exactly.
I don't think because that's why I hate the term "za." Because when I hear "za," I hear packs. I hear it, and it tears me up inside because I know what's in those packs. But that's what's flooding the market.
Yeah,
I think downstairs. I think that that's why cookies gets a bad name. That's why gelato gets a bad name. That's why sunset sherbets get a bad name because exactly what you said. All of the booth is being covered and sold under that name, you know?
right.
And
Yeah.
I've taken the time to actually grow these plants and I'm looking at it personally. And the homie got me verified cuts. And so I'm running the apples and bananas and I'm running the cookies and I'm running the peanut butter bread and I'm running the sunset sherbet and the Ingreds and stuff like that. And I cannot find a bad plant. Now, granted, I tell you this
No.
though, and I'm just gonna be honest. I think that so I'll call the names out. So the Skywalker OG, the 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 baker's fruit, and the peanut butter bread and the purple putts all have larger nugs than the cookies, right? But I tell you what, the cookie smells great, nice form, like Kush size nuggets. They're small. I don't see a large plant there. But my goal is to take that plant and some of those features and
Yeah,
add to it. You know what I mean?
yeah. I think if we're just talking
What
about,
up, yo?
so let's talk about, so this is kind of branch off into 4 different ways. Let's talk about the actual strains that people always hate, right? If we're talking about Girl Scout cookies, we'll throw Sunset Sherbet in there, we'll throw gelato in there. Let's talk about the actual strains, right? If you actually have these strains the way that they are supposed to be, the legitimate cut, and you
Right.
actually grow it out and you've got a great sample of it, right? They're good. They're not amazing. I don't think that in a table full of strains, especially if you're being honest and you're putting it against the best of the best, those strains aren't winning a ton of cups. Those strains aren't winning a bunch of like Growers' Choice Awards. The reality is Girl Scout cookies was just watered down OG Kush. It was kind of boring, a little gassy, a little creamy. It kind of started those like sweet,
I
kind
like
of
that shit.
creamy cookie strains. And it's not bad, bro. It's not bad weed. I'm not saying like it's garbage, throw it away, don't ever run
Yeah.
it. But at the end of the day, I don't think in a room full of connoisseurs, that's the one that everybody's going to go back to 10 times out of 10, right?
What would you put up as something that you think universally everybody would agree on?
So now we have to be a little
Wait,
further. I had to
you
ask you a couple of
blindfolded, you
questions.
still.
Do you mean just smoke? Like if I could grow it, it could be the
Oh,
dankest weed
don't get
ever.
me
But
talking about THC, bro.
if I'm
Say it again.
just giving you, if I'm just giving you like flavor, it would probably be something like the pineapple sorbet. Listen, man, here's my thing. I think if you really want to wow people, if you can describe whatever strain with one or two little simple words, then it's not going to wow people,
Yeah.
right? If I can just say it's kind of piney and it's got like a little gassy thing, then that's not going to wow people, right? Today, especially connoisseurs, people that are around seeds, that are around strains, that are around dank all the time, the thing about a lot of those strains is they're one note. Sunset Sherbet was really good when it popped 25 years ago, 20 years ago, or whatever. Like it was it was kind of like flow, but not. It was kind of floral, but not. It had this kind of funky, fruity thing that's really neat. And it's kind of complex. Like Sunset Sherbet, particularly, out of those that we named, is probably the one that's a little bit danker. So many of those other strains are just watered down OG Kush because so many people on the West Coast die for OG Kush, but they can't find the legitimate cuts of OG because, like, if we're talking about Triangle, we're talking about SFV, we're talking about maybe Hell's Angels. Like these are coveted cuts even today.
Yeah.
They're not super common.
Right.
And to find like the legit cut, people hold that shit for years and years and years, and then that's
Yeah.
all they smoke. And so many of these other strains that you're talking about, cookies, the Gary Payton shit, like so many of those strains, they're just watered down OG Kush. It's just trying to be OG Kush, and it's not. And OG Kush has never been a great strain to grow. If you've grown it, it's not the greatest yielder. If we're talking about Triangle Kush SFV, like that's OG Kush. That's pretty much OG. That's what we're
Fuck
talking
no.
about. They're not huge yielding. They're not they're not the greatest throwing down. Like it's dank weed, but it's almost never something you're going to fill a whole room
Yeah,
with.
but again, like, are you growing for? So, are you? Is your argument that it is not dank weed, or is it
Oh,
that
it's
because
dank
it
as
doesn't
fuck.
produce,
The original,
it
here's what
doesn't
I'm saying, like
produce?
the original OG Kush cuts are dank as fuck. And most of these other cuts, especially stuff like cookies and some of these other hype, like just gassy crosses, are just trying to fill a void where people can't get real OG Kush. Like if OG Kush falls into this category of like, it's kind of a connoisseur strain in the sense that it's not super commercially viable. It's dank. But like the OG Kush cuts, Triangle and SFV are tired. They're 40 years old now. They're tired. They've been copied and copied and copied and copied. They've been cloned and cloned and cloned, even in the best case. And it's just like, man, they're exhausted. They're not easy strains to grow. They grow really lanky. Like every of the best OGs that I've had were crosses of those strains. So Triangle Kush crosses, SFV crosses, stuff like that,
Yeah,
because then you get the best of what it offered, but you don't get that tired, exhausted little 3-leaf thing. Like it just throw those little 3 leaves because it can't even make a whole leaf. It's just
but
sad.
that's again, in my opinion, I think those plants present. I don't know. In my opinion, those plants produce something that I like, right?
Oh yeah,
So,
and that's it.
no, no,
That's
no, no,
it
no.
though, bro. It's a
But
connoisseur type of thing.
no,
So
check it out,
that's
check
why
it out,
there's
check it
never
out,
enough.
check it out.
That's why there's never enough, because if you grow it, you're going to grow it for you. But somebody who grows 100 lights isn't going to run that and just run packs for the neighborhood. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah,
Like, it's
yeah.
just not commercially viable. So, like, when you see a lot of shit, that's why everybody knows Blue Dream. It's because Blue Dream grows big fucking